I watched Wake Up Dead Man a couple weeks ago, and I've been really wanting to talk about it, but I've found it difficult to organize my thoughts because this is a big movie with some very big themes. I also took a little bit of time off for Christmas, but I'm back now, so I'm finally doing it. And I'll say, yeah, I'm a very big fan of this series of movies, of the Benoit Blanc films, the Knives Out series as it's also known. I will say, though, I think that this one, by a small margin, is the weakest mystery. The first two have a really interesting halfway point reversal. I don't think this one does. Some of the plot points don't work quite as well, but in terms of the themes that it's addressing and the main character, there's always Benoit Blanc and there's another person who's always a really strong, interesting performance. I'm a huge fan of Josh O'Connell's pastor in this. This movie is a movie that deals with religion, and I think that the way that it handles it is one of the best, most interesting ways that I've ever seen religion handled, because it pits the zealots, the people that have become so prominent, especially in this country, who are using religion as a way to, whether or not they believe, as a way to gain power and influence for themselves, that are hypocrites. This evangelical mindset that has become so toxic to this country, and it's pitting that against the actual teachings and believers of Christianity. And I think the way that those two are opposed is really just incredible. Personally, I'm not necessarily somebody who is still considers myself a member of any organized religion, but I'm still somewhat spiritual, somewhat faithful, and I was luckily enough to be raised in a church that preached love and compassion. And that's what this movie ultimately does. Whether or not you're a believer, this movie is made from the standpoint of someone who was raised in the faith but lapsed in Benoit Blanc, and Ryan Johnson is also someone who has lapsed faith. It preaches that compassion is the way forward. And I love that there's a very on-the-nose visual metaphor in this, but this zealotrous church has a blank space where the cross used to be, and now Jesus is missing from this church. And I think that is, very, very apt for what this movie is trying to say. Like I said, it's a little bit on the nose, but it works. So ultimately, Wake Up Dead Man, one of my favorite movies of the year. I would really recommend, whether or not you have been raised in the church, this is a movie that I think you should watch.